Fiery embrace original sin. Good news. Mary's sacrament. 7 demons that remove the sins of the world.
The most beautiful testimonies of love given to Jesus came from Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. This is not insignificant, for the foundations of Jesus' doctrine are established on a law of love for one another. So, on this premise alone, we can establish that Jesus' favorite disciple was Mary. It seems strange that Mary does not accompany Jesus to the end like many other faithful. After the meal at Simon the leper's, we only see her again at the crucifixion in all the Gospels. Only the Gospel of John speaks of Lazarus. Only the Gospels of Luke and John speak of his sisters Martha and Mary. The other 2 Gospels do not speak of any of them. The only Mary who exists in all the Gospels is Mary Magdalene. Moreover, in 3 Gospels, she appears chronologically while Lazarus' sister disappears. In the Gospel of Luke, she appears, briefly, a few sentences after the first apparition when Mary perfumes Jesus. It is then explained that Mary Magdalene is one of the many disciples of Jesus. These 2 Marys are never mentioned in one same place. On all these points, we can believe that these 2 Marys are the same. It seems to us possible that this change in terminology is intended to protect the woman in question, unless it is more aimed at protecting its future reputation from the misogyny of a few hitch scribes. In such a case, what better cover can be given than to baptize her sinful and possessed of demons? Then, all credit goes to 12 male disciples. Another fact indicates the importance of Mary Magdalene to Jesus. While Mary weeps bitterly as she perfumes Jesus' feet, he tells her that her faith saved her. It is exactly a verse further than a Mary Magdalene, relieved of 7 demons, appears as a follower. In no other place is there any mention of such a relieved woman, which in itself is quite unusual in the Gospels. Nor is there any precise indication of why Mary weeps at Jesus' feet so that he may have to forgive her. Yet the writings refer to a well-reported event. We know that several demons fled before Jesus and his apostles, but we don't see anything that specifically points to this event. It seems that the only sinner, named Mary, described by Luke, is precisely the one who asks forgiveness a few sentences before. The mention of Mary Magdalene by Matthew takes place immediately after the death of Jesus on the cross. He describes her as present with many other women placed at a distance. Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is with her, and Salome. In the evening these 2 Marys meet in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea where Jesus is placed. A day later, the 2 Marys, Jean, Salome and other women return and make the observation of the resurrection of Jesus. 2 angels ask them to inform the other faithful. Wary, Peter went to check the places that were deserted. But at dawn, Jesus first appeared to Mary Magdalene. She had come early to perfume the remains. Later, Jesus manifested himself to the other disciples, and as they had not believed in Mary Magdalene and had been harsh, Jesus rebuked them. The Gospel of John describes Mary Magdalene near the cross with the mother of Jesus, Mary of Clopas, and the sister of the mother of Jesus. We find the disciple that Jesus loved. John calls himself thus. It is only in this Gospel that John would be present at the foot of the cross. Let us say only for the moment that it was obviously very perilous to be there for a male disciple. But the burial scene is rather nebulous. We know that Joseph of Arimathea inherits the body, and that with Nicodemus they treat it with respect. But it then seems that the tomb is near the place of crucifixion. John seems to assume that the body could not be moved in the view of the citizens in celebration. During the night, before sunrise, Mary Magdalene returns to the tomb and discovers it empty. She runs to tell Peter and John. They make the same observation and remember the promise of Jesus' resurrection. In this account, we detect in the author a rivalry of fidelity to Christ. John mentions that he is the first to arrive at the tomb. Afterwards, the 2 disciples leave, for it is still threatening to love Jesus. Nevertheless, Mary Magdalene stays at the scene and cries. Angels ask her why she cries. She tells them that her master has been kidnapped and that she does not know where he is. Jesus comes in and asks her the same question. Believing that it is a gardener, she respectfully threatens him. Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Touched by this bravery, Jesus said to her,
Mary.
She turns around and says in Hebrew, Rabboni. Jesus said to her,
Do not touch me, for I am not yet ascended to my Father.
Thus, Mary Magdalene no longer appoints Jesus Lord, but Master. She does not name him as she would appoint a gardener, Joseph of Arimathea, or any respected man of the Jews and the mighty. She does not regard him as an oppressor, but as the only director of all rectitude. This notion is important to understand the emotion of this reunion. This is probably what John wanted to show in this terminology contrast. Thus, we are no longer faced with a simple historical narrative. We are faced with a very painful emotional testimony of Mary Magdalene's sincere love for Jesus and Jesus for Mary Magdalene. But Jesus seems, above all, to assume that his body will be given as a witness to God of the cruelty of men and consequently of the love he owes them. And suppose that the tenderness of Mary Magdalene can revoke many of Christ's wounds. Thus, Jesus comes to say that Mary Magdalene is the most worthy of the kingdom of God in 2 points. She caught the first attention of Jesus after his death. She was the first to be consoled. But moreover, she is the only one in all the Gospels, to whom Jesus has prescribed that she not touch him then. To all the others, Jesus prescribed that they touch him. This suggests that the touch of others was a cold measure of authentication, while Mary's was at the comfort of Jesus instantly recognized. And we recognize, like Jesus, the tenderness of Mary the sister of Martha and Lazarus. But we can add a mention. If Jesus refuses her to touch him, it is therefore because Mary Magdalene is already worthy of the kingdom of God. Given her gift of healing, like Jesus, Mary Magdalene was more perfect than all the other disciples. Why would Jesus not have reappeared to that Mary sister of Martha who was so sweet to him, and to whom he had promised that his share would not be taken away from her? Jesus thus opposed to the spirit of male superiority by first appearing to women. He also made it clear that Mary Magdalene was the disciple he had preferred. But he also wanted to use these favors to deepen the faith of his apostles. This faith had to be sufficient for them to deliver their lives in his name. It is by this means, at least in part, that the apostles were motivated to divulge the message throughout the world. Perhaps this is why the writings remain so nebulous in relation to certain characters that Jesus or the faithful community wanted to protect. But there is at least one solid assumption left. We will remember that Mary the sister of Martha had scented the feet of Jesus after the resurrection of her brother Lazarus. When the disciples rebuked her for this prodigality, Jesus defended her. As Judas wanted to sell the perfume, he said to him,
"Let her keep this for the day of my burial."
After such defense and honor on the part of such a lover, is it not likely that the first person to go to the tomb was Mary sister of Martha? So that's what happened, but she did it under the nickname of Mary Magdalene. Jesus may have wanted it to be covered in this way until the time was right. But the less skeptical will believe without hesitation that Mary Magdalene is the sister of Martha and Lazarus. Simply referring to one apocryphal where Mary the sinner, Mary Magdalene, pours the precious perfume on Jesus. In the biblical one, it is Mary the sister of Martha who proceeds. Thus, the apocryphal confirms our search. The washing of the feet, this sacrament of Mary, is important for Christian gatherings. The grand project is a peaceful protest work. Inevitably, it encounters resistance. This resistance comes mainly from the authorities in power, for it is to oppression and hierarchies that Christianity is mainly an obstacle to. In many places, therefore, Jesus prescribed to his disciples a work of constant serene flight. Jesus' strategy was to shake the governing bodies in his path by disclosing his doctrine. When the latter encountered organized opposition or rejection, Jesus prescribed to the disciples to move away. In a barbaric society, this implies that the faithful must love walking. It is therefore under this gaze that Mary Magdalene's consolation for Jesus has become a model of consolation among ideal Christians. This sacrament has three goals: equality and simplicity, comfort in peaceful struggle, and a tendency to return to the fundamental and original values of Adam and Eve. There is an Old Testament account that makes important reference with the washing of Jesus' feet by Mary Magdalene. Abraham had received 3 angelic visitors with human appearance. Although they remained anonymous, Abraham had their feet washed with hospitality. Given his goodness, the angels responded to Abraham's desire to have a child. Thus, the act of Mary Magdalene comes to make 2 demonstrations. First, Mary Magdalene thought this controversial Jesus was an angel. More than Abraham, who needed 3 angels, Mary Magdalene relied on the perfection of Jesus alone. If Abraham is noteworthy in relation to traveling angels, what about Mary Magdalene before the Son of God? What can also be added to this inference is that, in her great respect for Judaism, Mary Magdalene also has an undeniable strength for the gender equality movement. Morality, ethics, environmentalism, and love for each other are not sexist sciences. On the contrary, all forces must be available and unhindered. This act of Mary Magdalene, and the fact that Jesus institutionalizes it, show Christianity's attachment to fundamental Judaism.